Hello, my name is Shaddai Tembo, your host for this week's TTS Talking Early Years podcast. I'm a lecturer in early childhood studies at Bath Spa University and an associate lecturer at the Open University. I am a trustee for the Fatherhood Institute and an independent writer and speaker for critical early years. Now, throughout this series, we'll be exploring representation in the early years, inspiring you with guidance on ways to be more inclusive in your practice. And I am delighted to welcome to the host of the podcast today, Joss Cambridge-Simmons, as today's guest. To round up our fourth and final episode, I'm keen to ask your thoughts on what settings can do to encourage a more diverse profession. So Joss, what are those practical steps that settings and practitioners can take to ensure better gender diversity amongst the workforce?
Settings can do more by putting out like marketed promo, having more conversations around gender equality in the workplaces, and going above and beyond to find men. Because I know the harder issue is finding us because there's not enough of us. I think we're like 2 or 3%, which finding 2% out of 100 is going to be difficult. So I'm with them on the fact that it's not going to be easy to find men that work in early years. And most of the men that work in early years are in roles they enjoy. So, but it's going above and beyond. And even if you put out a campaign to support men, but don't get any off the back of that, that won't go unseen. Because I guarantee your parents will get behind it. And it also eradicates patriarchal views because parents that question that are either going to take their kids out of the setting or you're going to have a conversation with them on why we have to have an equal gender team. And it's so important and imperative as well that for the fact that settings, schools, early years on a whole, the government make it something that's on the agenda because, like I said in the first conversation, was the less and less men we have in early years, the less and less men we'll probably have in households being present fathers and, you know, being a present parent, in regards to whether they're mum or dad, because the more men we have in early years, the more men are trained somewhat to be parents that have a skill set and have the understanding that, you know, my child needs a nappy change, I can change the nappy because I did it at work as a walk in the park. And it gives you the upper hand on fatherhood for where actions wise, there's a lot you know, a lot of what you can do already because you've been doing it already. There's still other bits of fatherhood that come when you become a father, so I'm not going to put two together. But there's so much that I've learned from my work that would aid me in the household if I was a parent, where the bigger picture of it is it even supports women in a factor of the more present men we have in childcare, the more men that will become nurturing, attentive, caring, great communicators. So if they do become husbands and they have partners and they have families, these women are in safe spaces with men that actually want to be as present for their children as the mum does in every way possible, and is going above and beyond every way possible because it's now embedded in them. Their practice as a human is someone that will pick up a child because the child's crying. It's not going to be like a mum can do it because society's told you that men don't really give cuddles. So that's why it's imperative, and that's ways it can be done. Having conversations, having a man in childcare come in to talk to your childcare setting about what it is.
Yeah, that's really important. And we'll just stay with those conversations with parents because overwhelmingly, we know that parents can be really receptive to these sorts of ideas and really want to ensure that their children go to settings that are more diverse. But inevitably, there will be some parents who are very reluctant to have these conversations. And for staff members, that can raise a lot of anxiety when you think about doing this kind of work. What would your advice be to those practitioners wanting to have those conversations with parents who are perhaps anxious and worried about getting the wrong kind of response from parents and carers?
I've realised the conversation with allyship and anti-racism needs to be a conversation that you have and you're ready to lose friends and lose business. Because said families might take their children out to setting just off the back of a conversation where you're supporting your setting's views and your setting's ethos, where the way to have the conversation is be honest. You don't have to show resources and statistics. You've got to be honest and kind of be true to who you are and who your setting is. And it's very hard for me to say be tactful with people's emotions when it comes to anti-racism, because there's nothing to be tactful with. You're being ignorant. But also understand the background your parents come from. You can't aid them because you can't hold their hand through this moment because they're struggling to understand why you'd want a man in here. And then, for example, like, you could have a conversation about showing them films. 80s Baby, Look Who's Talking, Kindergarten Cop, Daddy Daycare, Three Men and a Baby. Were all films where men were put in caregiving roles, whether they liked it or not, and they did amazing. So it could be something where you showed a conversation, or you show a film, or you have a conversation about this is what it looks like and this is why it's important. Because in those films, those men did it and they did it well and they enjoyed it. Eddie Murphy is one of the reasons why I became a practitioner educator. Look Who's Talking, seeing John Travolta being so caring and endearing. Probably why I'm the man I am today, and I was like 4 when I saw that. So look what that did for me. That can aid conversations of practitioners letting their parents know that it's important that we have men around our children that aren't just their fathers. So your daughter can see a man in every context possible in a safe space and understand that a man's someone that she can talk to and trust in. Because the same way your son can now see someone that he can actually be okay to feel how he feels and play football and like wrestling and still cry, because Shaddai and Joss work there and sometimes they cry when they get happy or get upset. And your children are seeing this and it's normalised. So that's why we have men here and we need more. And we'd love you to be on board with this. But if you want support in challenging your own upbringing and thoughts, here's some resources. And they send them an email of resources. And that's the most I can say to do to hold their hand, because I don't want to have to hold anyone's hand through their views on why men shouldn't be here.
Yeah, absolutely. What you say there about parents and various different forms of media feels really, really important and quite a useful strategy to engage them in different kinds of content. You mentioned there that parents might walk away and take their child out of the setting. We have to emphasise that all settings are bound by the Equality Act 2010, which eliminates discrimination and prejudice. So if all settings took that seriously, that particular family might have a hard time finding childcare or finding a setting that would allow those sorts of views to take place, of course. Yeah, that feeds into a broader discussion about the role of government and governmental policy, and whether or not that's doing enough to legislate for a more diverse workforce. So what are your thoughts on the role that government can play, really, in this conversation?
By I've always dreamt of a nationwide campaign for men in childcare over like a 10-year period or 6 years. So it's an ongoing conversation all over the UK. I know Scotland do quite a lot for men in childcare from I've seen some research. So following their footsteps, getting advice for how they've challenged it, and going to the voices like TTS and the platforms that support these conversations to get them part of the conversation to make it a societal issue, not just the issue of early years. So we all now care to make this an equal, measured working environment, because I guarantee society really found out that the working environment for early years is predominantly women and there's not only men. So your children are being raised by personally one gender. So your children are going to be grown up for the first 5 years of their life to only see things maybe one way or 5 different ways, but from someone that happens to be a woman. People might be like, oh, you know what? I need my child to be exposed to everything. and so they become someone that's personable and understanding, knowledgeable. And government can support that is by looking. I think it's patriarchy again, because it doubles back to the whole conversation about how we view women as a society, how governments view women in the workplace. What importance do they see women holding in the workplace, whether they have a high salary or not? And looking at women as whether they become mums or not, they're still valuable to us as a business. Because as soon as some women become mothers in some businesses, they're looked at as disposable and they're given 20-hour loose contracts. Oh, she's got a husband at home, that's fine. So that means now taking dad out of the equation, he's now at work, not being able to be the dad he wants to be because you've cut down mum's hours because she's now a mum. So it's governments looking at the household is it's 50-50. This isn't a dating app, this isn't Instagram. Government needs to look at it as 50-50 in the realm of we need to be able to make dads around as much as mums. Not with the mental and emotional labour, which isn't 50-50 because we know woman bear child. But as for the household and the supportiveness of what one can give each other in the household, the government needs to make space for that. And I think that's the issue as well, where the more space that's made for that, the more men that be like, you know what, I love being in the house with the kids and supporting them. Can I get a job in this? Actually, let me be a childminder because I can stay at home with them. Which is what a lot of men have done. But then you would never have seen these men because they're still a small percentage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with you there, what you're saying. Yeah. The government certainly do have a strong role to play and a role that they could certainly play. If we further afield in Scotland and in certain parts of Europe where they put on campaigns that are funded, there have been some changes to a very small 2% statistic that we still have. But what you say there about a national campaign is also really important. I guess that feeds into the importance of networks and having kind of spaces and forums to have these discussions. We both know that the Mighty campaign has been happening over the past 10 years or so. That's men in the early years. How important are those sorts of networks to continue that conversation and ensure that there is a space for these sorts of issues to be discussed on a more national scale?
It's imperative because as a man in early years, you'll feel alone until you see another guy. Like my best friend was the chef when I worked at Asquith, UB. But like we became best friends because the environment in a nursery will make you feel like you can't confide and bond with the women you work with to an extent because you're being shunned out because you're a guy. So you go looking at masculine energy, which is probably the worst thing to do because I should be able to bond with anyone. My bonding with you shouldn't be based on my gender. But because it's become a gender-specific thing within the setting, I'm now best friends with the chef, getting extra food. And the importance of having equal measures of genders and settings is so that doesn't happen. Because I look at it, that wasn't a healthy environment for anyone to thrive in work-wise, where your gender is on the line because of your gender. And it's imperative as well because even mentally, as a man, you have your own trials and tribulations of manhood. To then be having to be questioned due to your choice of work. Like, what are we really doing? How unsupportive is that? How against that? That's not supporting anyone's growth, where it's definitely understandable why male suicide rates are so high. Because our views of masculinity and manhood in men definitely don't harbour into men wanting to be nannies or educators. It pushes them to want to be something that they're not. So I think the longer-rooted campaign of men in early years would aid so much. Because if you look at us, if you look at a tree, early years are at the foundation. If at the foundation where we're supporting more men into early years, supporting more LGBTQ and transgenders into early years and non-binaries, we hopefully would have more men in the early years, which means less stressed mothers, which then means more present dads that are happy with their version of masculinity, which then means hopefully less men committing suicide because they're happy with who they are. It aids everything. Moms can go to work and be great and make money. dads can be home with their kids and make money and go to work, and everything's kind of fluid and done in a way where every step aids the other step. And then you get a generation of young men that are happy to be who they want to be because they was raised by men that did the same, whether it was Shaddai the educator or Joss the nanny or Daddy.
Yeah, that's really important. I think what you're saying about initially the role of networks, we need to be quite pragmatic with this. We do need to talk about the issues of men in the early years, but we don't want to pigeonhole it too much. And ultimately, This should be a conversation that we all should be having. That for me feels really, really important. And what you just said there about the tree, which I'm kind of envisaging as a gender equality tree now,
of course,
also feels a really important idea. The conversations around men working in the early years are just one branch of that broader conversation about masculinity in society and the role of men and who they are and how they should be perceived in the workplace, but in all aspects of life. And that feeds into the broader conversation that we're having around gender equality in society as a whole, how we can all improve our well-being and development around those sorts of issues. That for me was really, really fundamental and a great idea that you shared with listeners just there on this podcast, and also a really important place to end this discussion. So finally, thank you to you, Joss, for your participation in this podcast. It's been lovely to listen to your ideas today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
I would like to say a huge thank you to our guest, Joss, for joining us and providing such valuable insights. You've been listening to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Shaddai Tembo, and Joss Cambridge-Simmons. If you've been inspired by our conversation today, don't forget you can sign up via the link in our episode notes and be the first to hear about future episodes.